Hello, how are we all doing? So today we're going to do a bit, which is a bit more important than most people realize. But we'll give people a few minutes to come in. Excuse the washing machine in the background. So if you go back to about the 1000s, Elgin's already here. It's mentioned in a royal document in the 1100s, and for it to even have brought the attention of the king, it's got to have been there for a while. Just let me post an advert. Bear with me. I can't text and write because I'll end up texting what I'm saying. See this autocorrect thing, it really annoys me. Right, so in the 1000s, Elgin was already here. Basically, it went from Ladyhill to pretty much where Costa's is on the high street now. And then there was a big gap from there to where the museum is, where you would hit the walls of the cathedral. But we're going to do Ladyhill tonight, so we're coming back in to Ladyhill. Ladyhill has a castle on top. Now it's basically a few walls that are maybe waist high if you're lucky. And there's a wee marker stone at the top. I can't remember what's on the marker stone, to be honest. But I'm going to tell you about the castle first. So the hill is a natural hill. It's not a man-made hill, contrary to some people's beliefs. It is a natural hill. The castle that was on top was where the kings of Moray lived. Up to about the 1300s, Elgin had its own king. Moray had its own king, because they thought the Scottish king was as useless as the English one. So there was a king of Moray, the last of which is a very famous man. The last king of Moray to live in Ladyhill Castle was Macbeth, the real one. Nothing to do with Shakespeare's one. Shakespeare's version of Macbeth is the complete opposite to the actual Macbeth. Macbeth, as the king of Moray, opened trade routes with Norway, Germany. We even had some trade with down south, which has been evidenced by nearly 2.5 tons of Whitby jet being found during excavations at Spiny Palace, which of course was the international port for Elgin back then. 3 miles away from the high tide mark now, though. So this is why people forget that this was a very important place. Elgin was an important place, and Moray was an important place. Most of Scotland had bent the knee to the King of Scotland, and Moray was like, nah, he's just as useless as the English one. So we still had our own one. Macbeth also drew up a lot of basically what you would nowadays call fair trade charters with the local farmers. Hiya! A lot of the local farmers were being badly treated by whoever they were paying the rent to, be it one of the local lairds, the bishop, or whatever. But Macbeth decided, no, these are the guys that feed us. We need to give them a better deal. So he basically invented like a fair trade scheme where if the tenant farmer was being abused by the landowner would be taxed more and more and more by King Macbeth until they actually gave their tenants a break and helped their tenants make a thriving business. Because back then, of course, as now, it's the farmers that feed us. So Macbeth was actually, he was a really switched on dude. He was a really nice guy. Yes, he had temper tantrums. People always did back then in medieval times. But he didn't go around killing people unnecessarily. Now, King Duncan, the King of Scotland during the time of Macbeth, didn't like the fact that this wee corner of northeast Scotland was not going to bend the knee to him. So he decided, that he was going to go against King Macbeth. Now, both men had a valid link to the throne of Scotland. Both men, biologically, genetically, go back into Kenneth MacAlpin, the first king. But Macbeth's family also went back into the Clan Chattan, which basically nowadays only exists in the very, very far north of Scotland and along the west coast. But the Clan Chattan was basically who picked and who had all of the kings of Alaba, the kings of Pictland, and so on and so forth. Before we became Scotland, every tribal king was chosen by Clan Chattan, which was kind of recognised as like the highest level. There's still a bunch of sheep herders, excuse the language, but they were the ones responsible for picking the kings of what is now Scotland. And Macbeth's family bloodline went back into them. So Macbeth was convinced, as was all the locals in Murray, that his his was the most valid claim to be the King of Scotland. Whereas Duncan had come down similar lines, but his branched off into the MacAlpin side, who was the first recognised King of Scotland. Now, the MacAlpin side basically were, if you go back into almost BC times, they're Irish tribes who came across into Dalriada, which is the southwest of Scotland, like Oban and such like. They were Irish tribes that came in and mixed with the ones who were already there. So a lot of the locals are like, nah, he's Irish descent. He can't be the King of Scotland. Even though he had the family link into the MacAlpins. No, it all boils down to Irish. He shouldn't be king. So, in 1040, there was a big showdown. Duncan and Macbeth basically declared war on each other. Duncan, being the King of Scotland, wanted to make a big show of this, to show his power. So he came to the chosen battlefield, which is nowadays known as the Pitgaveny Estate, the beach just in front of Spiny Palace. King Duncan came round with his ships, making a big show of, look at me, I'm here, I am your king, and I'm going to beat this wee guy. But because all these ships, you could see them coming in, Macbeth's men were already sitting waiting for them. Hardly any of them got to set foot onto the sand before they were killed. So you've got like 12, 13 massive ships with the King of Scotland And Macbeth and basically 300-400 dudes, big dudes with big swords, and they're just sitting there on the beach. Come on then, come and dock your ship, see how far you go. So as the Scottish the Scottish men are coming off of the ship, you know, we're fighting on behalf of the king, we are the King of Scotland's army, yada 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 yada. Most of them were slaughtered before they even got to the beach. When it came down to a case of hand-to-hand contact, yeah, they were relatively evenly matched. The battle went on for about 4 hours. And they're all fighting lumps at each other. Bodies left and right on both sides of the battle. In the finish-up, Macbeth came face to face with Duncan. And they started. Duncan was mortally wounded by Macbeth himself and retreated immediately. Because of his injuries, and because as far as Macbeth was concerned, he had shown that he had every right to have the throne of Scotland, basically the battle was called off. Some of the survivors went to Maison Dieu Hospital for some rest and relaxation, because of course it's not a medical hospital, not in the 1000s. It was more like a spa. Rest and relaxation and lots of wine and food. Duncan, because he was the king, even though he had lost the battle, Macbeth says to him, he says, look, come to the castle, we'll treat you there and we'll help you. So, you know, he's just fought for the throne of Scotland and he's still willing to help his enemy because he knows he's been proven correct. So Duncan agrees to be taken to Ladyhill Castle and he's treated for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, he passed away in his sleep, basically because of his injuries. And Macbeth became the King of Scotland. So not only did the dude that was the King of Moray prove that his smaller group of men were better warriors than the king's men, he also proved his point by becoming the King of Scotland a few days later. The castle at that point, of course, was complete. The castle was destroyed in 1308. So, as you look at Ladyhill now, the side that faces the High Street, if you looked at that side between the 1000s and the 1300s, you have the garrison on the first terrace. You know where the first bench is when you get to the first landing on the stairs? You've got the garrison there. If we were in stressful times and we needed, the castle needed the protection of the human garrison. If the garrison weren't needed, you would have a first wall there. And behind that wall, you have fruit trees on your left side, and on your right side, you have some floral bits and pieces, but edible ones, a medicinal garden. Nowadays, what you would buy in Holland and Barrett, basically. Going up onto the next terrace, on the left side, the side nearest the 8 acres end of the High Street, you would have had the herb garden. Now, the herb garden was for the kitchen rather than the medicinal side. So this is your mint, your thyme, your sage, things like that. Of course, both could have been used medicinally, but this was the kitchen garden. If you were a high-ranking member of staff for the castle, like the head housekeeper or what we would nowadays call the butler, because there's not actually graveyards at this stage in history, it's just a case of you're buried wherever you want to be. High-ranking members of staff would have been buried within the kitchen herb garden, because then they are still contributing to the household And if you're buried in the kitchen herb garden, it's taken as a showing that you're quite high-ranking status for the building whose herb garden you're buried in. Then on the side that's nearest the Tesco side, you have the chapel. The chapel was dedicated to Our Lady Mary. Spot the clue? Now, the chapel survived the destruction of the castle, and the chapel was still intact and in use in the 1600s. Being that it was the chapel of Our Lady Mary, the chapel still existed, so the whole hill became classed as Ladyhill, or Lady Mary's Hill originally. The castle was destroyed during the time of Wallace. In 1308, we had a visiting king sleeping in Ladyhill for a week or two. Said king was Edward I. Yes. Longshanks visited Elgin 3 times that I know of, and all 3 times he basically created merry hell for a week and then disappeared back off to Englandshire. But this last visit to Ladyhill Castle, he brought massive garrison with him as well. One of the records I found said there was like 400 men with him, plus the household. So like his butler, his tailor, and so he probably had about 500 people with him. And they took up residence in the castle. Yeah, everybody come and pay your rent. This time we're paying the rent to the King of England. That was near the end, very near the end, of a 12-year period during which Elgin belonged to Edward I. We had 12 years where the town was surrounded by the English garrison. Nothing came in or out without the English army agreeing. And we had to follow their rules instead of our own. At the end of this 12-year period, there was a young man by the name of Andrew Murray. He'd had it up to here with the English. They'd turfed all the local staff from the castle out so that they could use the accommodation. Some of the locals were really getting fed up with this. They'd all heard stories drifting in the breeze of this William Wallace dude, and most of the locals completely agreed with him. And it was like, right, we need to do something about this. But we can't do nothing when the king's there, because there's a load of extra people there because the king's there. So the king left one Wednesday evening, the King of England. Edward I headed back down south. By the following Monday, things were almost back to normal, but the English garrison were still using the castle. So one night, this Monday night, Andrew and a few of his pals, there's only about 15, 16 of them, were sitting gathered together, having a dram, having a chat one evening. And they were basically winding themselves up about the English army and what Longshanks's men had done and what Longshanks himself had done. They got themselves so riled up that they decided to attack the castle, knowing that it was full of English troops. So they snuck up the steep side, which is now the High Street side, going through the bushes, out of sight, into the castle. Whenever they came across one of the English garrison asleep, they slit his throat. After about 5 minutes, people started noticing the noise, people moving, so everybody started to wake up. At this point, Andrew and his men grabbed whatever they could and set fire to the castle, killing men as they went. But their mission at that point was to set fire to the building and lock the doors behind them so that everybody was still inside. Oddly enough, in a great show of community spirit, when the people of Elgin saw the castle was on fire, knowing full well it was the English army who were inside the castle, everybody who was fit and able took up weapons, be it your cooking pot, your pitchfork, whatever. Everybody took up arms. The garrison that surrounded the town had all started moving back in towards the castle because they could see the flames too. And basically, Elgin became one massive running battle between the English and the locals. Half of the English garrison were killed that night. The other half run away. Andrew Murray declared it a victory for the locals against Longshanks's men. He had a wee celebration before his bed that night, and the following day he set off to go down south to join William Wallace. 3 days later, he died at the Battle of Stirling Bridge as one of William Wallace's highest ranking commanders. Who says an Elgin loon canna do something good? He was always, historically, he's always kind of been brushed under the carpet. Oh, he's just an Elgin loon. He didn't do anything much. Last year or the year before, they put a plaque up for Andrew Murray at Stirling Bridge, right next to Wallace's one. So, if you're feeling the odd emotional stirrings when you hear about the true story of Wallace, not the Braveheart movie, because it's like 20% fact. When you feel those emotional stirrings, if you're Elgin born and bred, or even if you're just local born and bred, just know that folk for this area actually did have a place in that battle at Stirling Bridge. So that leaves the castle destroyed. A lot of the walls are still standing, but it's basically just left. Nobody wanted to use it. Nobody wanted to spend the money to rebuild it. We didn't have a King of Murray anymore, so technically it was surplus to requirements, which is pretty much why Edward was able to take it over. So it was surplus to requirements and damage. So they left it to fall down. And over the years it fell down, but the chapel still existed. Now, the chapel was in use up until the late 1600s, early 1700s, at which time it fell out of use. I think basically because of the timings, it's going to be to do with the Covenanters, because anything that is the Chapel of Our Lady is going to be Catholic. Any church that old in Scotland is going to be Catholic. So I think it's going to be the Reformation that was the death knell for the Chapel of Our Lady Mary on Ladyhill. So the chapel was left to fall down too. You'll see a lot of buildings around town that have big fancy stones that have no use or reason to be in said particular building. Some of these could be from the cathedral, from the castle, from the chapel. You never wasted stuff. If there's a good block sitting there and the building's not being used, take the block. That's the way they looked at it back then. So it's all left to fall down, and we're left with a big hill with a pile of rubble on it, and the hill's got terraces. The terraces were all different sets for the garden and such like, because back then you had to be self-sufficient. There's no Tesco's. If you were biding in the castle when it was complete, you can't just nip down the road and fill the cupboards. You've got to grow it. George's left to Fadoon, and in the more modern era, we then come across the 5th Duke of Gordon. Now, let me put this into perspective for you. The 5th Duke of Gordon. So the dude on top of Ladyhill is number 5. Number 4 was his dad. Number 3 was his granddad. Number 2 was his great-granddad. Number 1 was his great-great-granddad. Now, his great-great-granddad was the 1st Earl of Huntly. All 5 of them are buried in Elgin Cathedral, along with their wives and a few other bodies. So he's of the Gordon family, who always had a running feud with the bishops for a long, long time, even right up until the time of his great-great-granddad, the Earl of Huntly. The one who's on top of the pillar is called George. Now, George was a military man, a very highly decorated military man. He made a lot of money, as a lot of military men did during the 1800s. And he put a lot of his money back into Elgin. He's facing Rothes because that's where he was born. That's why he's not quite looking at Elgin. He's kind of looking off into the distance. He's looking at Rothes. The statue itself, the pillar was put up. I've got to check the other page to get the dates. The pillar, the foundation stone for the pillar was laid on the 15th of February, 1839. And it was completed later that month. The statue of George was completed by Thomas Goodwillie, who was one of Elgin's absolute best stonemasons. If you walk through any graveyard in Elgin that's got graves for the 1800s, instead of looking at the face of the stone, if you look on the side, on the narrow bit, you might see T. Goodwillie, R. Goodwillie, or J. Goodwillie. The Goodwillies were the best stonemasons in Elgin. They are responsible for like 80% of the gravestones in Elgin through the 1800s. It's granddad, father, and son. So Thomas Goodwillie was the one who did the sculpture of George, and it took him 3 years to complete the sculpture. The pillar itself, once you get past the stone block at the bottom, the square block, once you're into the circle bit, the round bit, the round pillar is 6'9" from one side to the other. Inside that pillar is a spiral staircase that goes all the way up to the top and comes out just below George's feet. If you've never noticed the doorway, find somewhere where you get a good view. Usually you have to come to the Bishop Mill side with a good pair of binocs, and you can see there's a wee door underneath George's feet on the top of the pillar. When he finished the sculpture, it was like, yep, that's great, here you go. Now I have to say, the planning for this whole thing, the design of the pillar, was done free of charge by a dude from Edinburgh. His name is Mr. Byrne, who was an architect in Edinburgh. And his official description is, it's a Tuscan column 90 feet in height without the monument on top. The spiral staircase leading up, well, if the whole thing outside wall to outside wall is only 6'9", you've not got a lot of space in that staircase. When everything is running normally, you can actually book to go and have a look inside that pillar. You have to do it through the council. But at the moment, it looks like that's not going to happen this year anyway. When you get to the top of the pillar and come out of that wee door underneath George's feet, it's the only place in Moray where you can stand in the same spot, turn your head one way to see the Cairngorms, and the other way to see the Caithness Mountains without moving your feet. It's an amazing view. I've only ever seen photos of it. I've not been up there myself. I could definitely go up the stairs, but whether I could go out the door at the top, I don't know. I really don't know. I would like to try, though. So the sculpture's done by Thomas Goodwillie, and the amount of folk that have come on my tours and gone, oh, I thought it was a wifey. Okay, most of them have been young kids so far on that tour, but a lot of them do presume because of the flowing robes that they think it's a wifey that's up there. It's nae, it's George. So, but it took them a while to finish the sculpture, because the sculpture didn't get put up there until 1853. So when the pillars finished in 1839, that's basically 14 years to finally get the sculpture finished and on top of the pillar in place. Now the other thing on Ladyhill is Ladyhill House, which is not as old as it looks to be. Ladyhill House basically dates back to, I think it's like late 1700s, early 1800s. There is a tunnel that runs from Ladyhill House through the hill and pops out elsewhere, or did originally pop out elsewhere along the riverbank. Being that it's late 1700s, the only thing I can think of is smugglers, because it's after the Reformation, so we don't have Catholic priests running for their life anymore, because it's over 40, 50 years since. So the only reason for the tunnel to be there is, the only thing I can think of is smugglers. There is a lot of stonework that's been used within the house that you can see from the exterior that does have dates on it from like the 1600s, and there are some pieces that actually look like they're from the 1500s. Which houses or buildings those blocks actually came from, I really don't know. It's one of these funny things, because it's predominantly been in private hands. There's not a lot of information out there, short of actually going and chapping on the door and saying, here, can I come in and have a look? I can only tell you what I can see from the exterior. The wee side steps from Ladyhill House that come out in the bonny old arch that's got the 1600s date on the top. The top step is kind of weird, curved and fluted. It's because it's not a step. If you look at the shape of it, it's actually one of the bases from one of the pillars at Elgin Cathedral, because the pattern on it matches exactly the ones on the base of the pillars inside the cathedral. Of course, the pillars are gone. There's only a few bits and pieces of bases left, but not all the bases are there, because they've obviously got one in their staircase. As you're coming down those few steps, on your right-hand side, there's a long piece of stone that's kind of holding what would have been a flower bed originally up in place to stop it caving in. That's actually a door frame. If you look at it, you can see the flat face with the little beaded, fluted edge coming down the side. It's a door frame. Again, solid stone from a previously existing building somewhere in Elgin. So it looks like everybody who's ever had that house during its original 200 years has always been on the rob. If there's a good usable block of stone sitting there doing nothing, they've taken it. They've added it into the building. There's heraldic panels on the exterior of the house on the side that faces the sun all the time. So like if you're coming in from one side, if you went round to your right, that face of the building that faces out into the sunshine, there's heraldic panels on there that have nothing whatsoever to do with the building itself. They don't match. They're for two different families. So I don't know if one of the people who lived there in its original first 200 years was considered an antiquarian or a historian, but there are random odds and sods of stone from all sorts of different buildings in the grounds and on the building itself. So it's a bit odd, but yes, there is a tunnel. Another thing about Ladyhill that I have to address, one of my bugbears. 15 years ago, I overheard a history teacher from Elgin Academy telling his pupils that Ladyhill Castle was filled up and buried with plague corpses. And the hill actually has the castle inside. I've heard more intelligent stories from a 5-year-old. It's absolute bunkum. Number one, Elgin never had the plague, because we sealed up all the doorways and nobody got in or out of town without anybody saying so. Nobody got in or out of town, full stop, to be honest. And we didn't get the plague. But Cullen had it, Banff had it, Buckie had it, Forres had it. Elgin never got it. Number two, when we did have mass deaths in Elgin, like the cholera epidemic, they were put in pits, mass grave pits. Pinefield, Plainfield, beside Burger King. That's where they are. The only bodies that have been dug up on the brief bit of excavations that happened on Ladyhill in 1972, there was a male skeleton and a female skeleton side by side in what would have been the kitchen herb garden. Now, from what I've already told you earlier, we can guess that that is the head housekeeper and presumably her husband, who would have been Malay, because they're buried in the kitchen herb garden. The rumour that it's where the plague bodies is buried comes from the simple fact that everybody involved with the archaeological excavations in 1972 got sick. I don't know how, what symptoms they had or anything, but it is documented that every single one of them got really poorly and was bedridden for a number of weeks afterwards. Nobody died, nobody caught the plague, nobody caught TB, but they all got really sick. And that, combined with the two bodies, I think is what's got together, and the local grapevine have gone, oh, it's the plague bodies and they infected the archaeologists. Do your research. When you hear stories that are too good to be true, do your research before you pass a story on, because it could be absolute bunkum like that one. But no, there are no plague corpses on Ladyhill, because we didn't have the plague in Elgin. And the mass graves are on Pinefield. Pinefield, Plainfield is where the mass graves are. Well, the biggest section of them. There are a few others around town, one of which is under Glenmurray Distillery, but never mind. So there's not a lot else I can tell you about Ladyhill. So has anybody thought of any questions while I've been yammering at you? Oh, I know. The gardens. Why is there gardens? The gardens are the memorial gardens, basically dedicated to the veterans for the First World War and those who didn't come home from the First World War. That's what the gardens are there for. They're considered the memorial garden for the fallen. The big chalice thing that stands in between the two sides of the garden, I can't find anything about it. So if you hear anything about it, let me know and it'll give me a lead to start digging somewhere. Because at the moment, all my usual sources, nobody's mentioned it at all. I did find the archaeological report, which is how I knew the archaeology was in 1972, but I can't find that anything about that chalice that stands between the two. There are two houses at the base of the hill that look like gatehouses. Were originally intended, again, they were opened up when the gardens were opened up. They were originally intended to be for the spouses of the highest ranking ones at that point who hadn't come home. And then as they passed away, the next highest ranked soldier's family would have been given them, and so on and so forth. They were rent-free originally. I know what I haven't mentioned. A wee bit further up the street, down onto Old Mills Road, down onto Old Mills Road, you have St Mary's Well. St Mary's Well, again, dedicated to Our Lady Mary. St Mary's Well is a geological oddity. The source for the water that comes out there has not been tracked yet. None of the geologists that are up there in investigative areas have found it interesting enough to investigate. But the water is drinkable from the Mary's Well. There's nothing living in it. So in the event of a zombie apocalypse, the water is drinkable from the Mary's Well. But if you've got sensitive teeth, you won't want to drink it, because it naturally runs 15 degrees colder than any other water source in Elgin. And they don't know why. So it's very cold. Now, you know the whole thing on the 1st of May, you've got to get up and wash your face in the dew to make sure you stay pretty. Hang on, I'm just bringing this up because there's hardly any comments popping up. Make sure I can see them all. Hey Naomi, your comment didn't come on this screen, it's on the phone. And hi Shelley. So on the 1st of May, instead of washing your face in the morning dew, locally you had to go down to the Mary's Well and wash your hands and face and your feet, funnily enough, in the water of the Mary's Well. And that would not only maintain your health and your beauty, it would also allegedly add years onto your lifespan because it was considered to be blessed by Mary's spirit. Now, the only documented cures I can find tale of are people who had digestive problems. So they hadn't been, hi Grant, sorry, yours isn't on the screen either, so I can see it on my phone, but it's not coming up on here. They had digestive problems, so they couldn't go and their belly was sore. So on recommendation from others, yeah. Oh, I like that. That sounds just like your dad, actually. He used to be the highlight of me coming into Elgin when I was 15. I used to go and see what banter he was saying to folk. Yeah, the people with the digestive problems that I found documented as being treated by the Mary Well, they were instructed by the local priests at the time to strip off when nobody was around and duke themselves into the well, because it was big enough to lay in. At that point, it was big enough to lay in. Now, there's a dirty great wall coming over the top, and there's just a little bit that comes out of the wall. But they were instructed to duke in the cold water. Lay in the water for a count of 10. A slow count, so 20 seconds basically. And then get up. Now, I found 2 accounts. Both of them were men. And both of them reported that within an hour later, they were cured. They were able to go, and the pain had gone and all the rest of it. Now, yes, this might sound like a miracle cure. Oh, I know what that is. Yeah, the relatively modern one. You on about the relatively modern one? Yeah. These are documented as miraculous cures, but I think it's just basic, it's not physics, basic anatomy. When you're all bunged up inside and you can't go, there's slightly less blood flow to those areas because it's all inflamed and swollen, and it narrows the passages for the veins to go through. When you immerse yourself in cold water, the blood flow retreats from the skin to protect the core, which improves your blood flow in your abdomen, the heart, the lungs, the stomach, improves the blood flow there. And that cold shock is sometimes enough to set things in motion again. See, I'm trying to do this really nicely and politely without getting rather gross. Because we all know I'm speaking fine. So, but when the body's exposed to that cold shock and the blood retreats from the skin, it goes into the core to protect the core systems of the body so that you survive. And that is sometimes enough to cure your constipation. It's not a treatment I would recommend, especially if you're of a certain age or have a heart condition, because you might just give yourself a heart attack. But they used to use a cold water plunge right up into the 1920s, 1930s. If you were constipated, the standard treatment was a cold water plunge and stay in there for as long as you can stand it. And then an hour or so later, you get to go to the lavvy for the first time in however many days. It's the only cures I found for Mary's Well. But Mary's Well has been documented all the way back into the 1200s. I haven't found when it was first noticed, because the records I found from the 1200s they read as a follow-on, like as previously noted, blah, 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 blah. So I haven't found when it was first recognised, but it is documented in the 1200s. Right, let's have a look. You see down into it when you... Oh, it's not the building I think it is then. Is it Ladyhill House you're on about? The great big white inn? Audrey, is it the great big white house? Sorry, my washer's getting really noisy. If it's the big white one, it is Ladyhill House. The other oddity round the back of Ladyhill, the shallow one. Yeah, the roof's almost black. Round the back of Ladyhill, on the shallow side, like if you go straight up the road from Curves, and you can get up to the wheelchair path to go up Ladyhill. There's a wee rectangular building, looks like a bungalow, but it kind of looks like a bungalow shop with a metal plate in front of it. That's the old weigh station. When you had to get your lorries weighed every so often along the route, that was one of the places where the lorries could go and get themselves weighed to make sure they weren't breaching the capabilities of their engine and make sure they weren't breaching the regulations for the road. So that's what that one is. You too, Shelley. It's not letting me see these. I can only see half the comments. If there's a like on your comment, I've seen it on screen. I can't like them on the phone for some reason. So yeah, the old way station's up there beside the wheelchair path too. And I can't think of anything else to do with Ladyhill. My favourite bit about the Mary's Well is the arch that leads you to it, because it's on a diagonal slant on the stairs, and the stonework in the arch itself is also on a diagonal slant, so it's kind of almost MC Escher type stuff, you know, because it's all on the bias. It's all on the bias. None of it's actually straight and square. I mean, it is straight and square building regulations wise, but it's not block, block, block. It's like block, block, block. It's all on the diagonal. And I like it just because it's different. It's not the bog standard. And that's why I like it. I love that little arch. And up until about 7 years ago, I thought it was private property. I've heard a few from when there was a pub up there, but I don't know if that was part of the house or not. I keep dropping hints to folk I know that say that they know the owners and stuff. It's like, I want to get inside and have a look around, and I want as many stories as we can get. Because even if it is only 200-300 years old, there's still going to be a lot of stories. Especially with the smuggler's tunnel underneath. And the front door is amazing. It's actually, the stonework around the front doorway is fantastic. It's actually very similar to, I can't remember if it's Linlithgow Palace or somewhere else. Similar to what off a fancy wall that's down there. Sometimes you see a TV lighting up the room in one of them, but the other one has been dark every time I've come past it for a good while now. So I think one of them is still occupied, but whether the other one is or not, I really don't know. I mean, it could just be somebody who works nights, so they're never in at daytime. And yeah, with the little archway that leads up the steps. Yeah, that's Ladyhill House. That's Ladyhill House, that one. It's earlier on in the chat a wee bit. That would make sense with it being a B&B or hotel, because I know it was one bed sets basically for a while. Oh, I like that. Kids are always the first ones to give away their presents if you've got a ghost kid. They're always the first ones to give their presents away. Right? You hear the giggling, little stuff gets moved. Put your keys on one table, you come down half an hour later, they're in another place, but they're still visible. Kids are always the first one to let you know that they're there. Cool. Well, I will leave you to it for tonight. Tomorrow night is lossy. I need to do a bit of research, see if I can get some more info, because at the moment most of my stories are 1300s and before. You're very welcome, Julie. Thank you. So have a good night, whatever you're doing. Stay safe and look after you and yours. I'll see you tomorrow night.